And as we're driving south with this fire slipping past the missile defense system, there are plumes of smoke rising from southern Israel. And so I told the team, in case nothing else happens, I want to get a shot next to this smoke. So that way, if this is the extent of the attack, at least we have something to put on TV. Right. And so we meet at the largest plume of smoke next to the city of Ashdod in the south, do some reports to camera, and there's a delay in us meeting each other. We can't find each other initially. And at the time, I'm frustrated, but looking back, I'm thankful because that delay might have saved our lives.
Good evening and welcome to the Rosenberg Report, the only weekly primetime news and analysis program that's produced by Israelis here in Israel, indeed here in Jerusalem, on any American television network. I'm very grateful that my friend Trey Yingst, the chief foreign correspondent and Israel bureau chief for the Fox News channel, agreed to sit down with me. He's written a fascinating firsthand account of what he saw that dreadful day. But what makes his book even more interesting to me is that he includes interviews that he conducted, not only with Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, a man who rarely talks to the press, but also with senior Hamas leaders. Tonight, the first of a two-part series, Black Saturday, The Inside Story. Trey, thank you for sitting down with the Rosenberg Report, your first interview about this book, and it's a fantastic book. Thank you, first of all, just appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
So Black Saturday, an unfiltered account of the October 7th attack on Israel and the war in Gaza. It's an amazing book covering your actual firsthand account of reporting from the earliest minutes of this war on October 7th, that horrific Black Saturday morning. But then you take this all the way through to the first ceasefire and the first release of hostages, but you've continued reporting since then. Let's begin with that morning. I'm guessing you're asleep. Most of us were on a very quiet, what we thought was going to be a very peaceful Saturday morning. Where are you literally, and and how do you find out this war is in motion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in Tel Aviv. It's Saturday morning and I'm asleep and my phone rings at 7:03 a.m. on October 7th, and it's my producer. And if my producer's calling me in the morning on Saturday, I know there's breaking news, but I had no idea what the breaking news was. So I set up, I was trying to sort of get my bearings and said, what? And basically my producer described to me a rocket attack that was covering almost the entirety of Israel, a widespread attack. And so we've been through this before. There are often rounds between Israel and Gaza. Sometimes they last 3 or 4 days. Back in 2021, it was 11 days. And in 2014, it was 51 days. But
it was impossible to know at 7:03 the magnitude of this. I mean, I don't know. I don't think anybody understood. What did you do first? And when did you begin to sense that this thing was not normal?
My immediate...
And I hate to say normal,
sure,
but for those of us who live here and work here, it's normal.
My immediate reaction was this must be the response to some sort of targeted assassination inside Gaza. Because we'd covered so many of these rounds. One time I was actually in Gaza when this happened, but the Israelis would take out a commander or a leader from Hamas or Islamic Jihad. The response from these groups would be rocket fire into southern and central Israel, and then a few days of war would erupt and ultimately a ceasefire. This was different. There was something about this day that was different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And so I didn't have time to sit and ponder what it was. I got on the phone with my boss. I said, look, something's happening. We're headed to the south, to Sderot. Okay. Sderot is this community along the border, about 30,000 people, and we use...
It's the largest Israeli city, it's a small city, but right on that border.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use it because of its proximity to Gaza, but also because it's filled with bomb shelters. And traditionally, when mortars and rockets are flying, you want to be close to cover.
Right. Every bus stop in Sderot is a bomb shelter, a hardened facility, so you don't have to run that far.
Yeah.
Or if you're driving, you can stop and run in.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was the plan. And as I'm getting ready to go to the south, there's not a ton of pressure. We just know something's going to happen, and I want to get to reporting. Then the sirens start to sound in Tel Aviv. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if they're firing on Tel Aviv, something significant happened. I continue reporting. I go out to my balcony, and I don't have a flak jacket, but I've got a bulletproof vest. And part of the reason I put it on was because you want to have any protection you can, but also I didn't want people watching the video that I was taking to be worried about me. And I could see rockets slamming into the sea, being intercepted by Israel's missile defense system, the Iron Dome overhead. But again, I don't have time at this point, Saturday morning on October 7th, to think about what's unfolding. I got to get to the south.
You get in a car and you and your crew head south, and something dramatic happens as you are approaching Sderot.
Yeah, and so I tell the team we're going to meet in the parking lot of Sderot, a place that we've reported from dozens of times. I'll see you there. We'll coordinate on the way down. I get in my black Jeep Wrangler. I start driving south. There's no one on the road. It's Saturday morning, and some people...
When you say no one, were there police?
No one.
Was there military?
No one.
I mean, were there checkpoints?
Nothing.
I mean, the country is under attack.
Country's under attack, and people are either in synagogue or they are in shelters. And so I'm driving.
You have a straight shot.
Straight shot. I'm running a few red lights on the way there. I get to the expressway, and the rocket fire is continuing. And this is really an eerie feeling because I have to make a decision. Do we keep heading south? Do I call the team and tell them it's too heavy, the fire, or do we keep going? At this point, let's keep going. This is what I think to myself. But as I'm driving on Route 4 towards Sderot, the fire gets really heavy, and I can see the rockets slipping past the missile defense system, just nonstop rocket fire. And I run into some other cars, and these cars have pulled over to the side of the road, and I think to myself, all right,
that's wisdom.
Let's take a second. And the whole time, I'm still reporting. I've got my camera with me, I've got my phone with me, and I pull over. I'm shooting some photos of people on the side of the road, and these rocket interceptions are taking place right overhead. And I'm thinking for sure there's going to be shrapnel falling on us. It's so close that you can feel the interception.
Do you have a helmet?
Nothing. Okay. I've just got this bulletproof vest, and the bulletproof vest is meant for bullets, not for rocket shrapnel. But I tell my team that morning, get me my flak jacket from the office, and I'll see you in the south. And as we're driving south with this fire slipping past the missile defense system, there are plumes of smoke rising from southern Israel. And so I told the team, in case nothing else happens, I want to get a shot next to this smoke. So that way, if this is the extent of the attack, at least we have something to put on TV.
Right.
And so we meet at the largest plume of smoke next to the city of Ashdod in the south. We do some reports to camera. And there's a delay in us meeting each other. We can't find each other initially. And at the time, I'm frustrated. But looking back, I'm thankful because that delay might have saved our lives.
Because what happens? You reach some police cars that are stopped. It's not a checkpoint exactly, but you stopped it because, anyway, find out what's going on and assess where you are. And
absolutely. Right after this, we continue our plan. We're starting to get some information from the border. There could be an infiltration, but again, we're not thinking the infiltration is 3,000 people. We're thinking it's a truck of militants. And so by the time we get there, the police and army will have dealt with them, and we're there to report.
Right.
And so our plan continues. We head towards Sderot. We get very close to a place called Yad Mordechai, which is just north of the Erez crossing where you go into Gaza. And we see an ambulance on the side of the road and some police and forces there. And we decide to stop. And when we get out, there's a lot of commotion because people don't know why we're there. No one knows really what's going on, but I want to do some reporting at this location.
Because civilians are not heading south.
No,
they're
civilians
heading north.
Are heading north.
Yeah.
And so there are people coming past us, but no one going toward Gaza.
Right.
And that's when we start to realize something's really wrong. But also that decision, one decision, saved our lives. And it was stopping at that intersection.
Because what happens next?
What happens next is this intersection turns into a triage point. And we realized that had we continued the drive, just one more intersection, we would have been in the middle of an ambush because Hamas was in Israel. They were conducting a massacre. And still this morning, we didn't know how large the massacre was.
You didn't even know there was a massacre at this point. You're thinking it's a massive barrage of rockets.
For sure.
Maybe some infiltration, but that's as much as you know at this point.
And I'll tell you when we...
But you're hearing gunfire?
We're hearing gunfire when we get out of the car.
That's not normal.
That's not normal.
I mean, for as much as war correspondent role that you've had, gunfire inside Israel, automatic gunfire, is not something that you've heard.
And look, as a correspondent, at the end of the day, it's my decision about whether we stay or move. It's my call. And I'm going back and forth in my head at that intersection. Do we keep moving with the plan to get towards Sderot or not? And I think it was the gunfire that stopped me. Because I thought to myself, this isn't normal.
Yeah, something's not computing.
Something's not computing.
All right, hold that thought.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll pick up this story. And then as your reporting unfolds, as the book unfolds, you start talking to people who went through that day, but also you interview in the book, in Black Saturday, you talk about hostages that were taken that day and then what their experiences were, because you talked to them when they got out. We'll talk about that when we come back.
Coming up next on the Rosenberg Report, what happened when Hamas gunfire erupted at an Israeli intersection that Trey Yingst and his Fox News crew were approaching? And what did Trey learn when he interviewed Israeli hostages held in those terror tunnels after they were released by Hamas? What did they experience? And what was the toll that it took on them? Find out when the Rosenberg Report continues on TBN right after this break.
But first, I want to say that in Israel's darkest hour, a lot of people are asking me, how can we help? How can we support Israel in its time of greatest need and be part of that biblical mandate found in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, where God is speaking of blessing those who bless the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, a great way to do it is to partner with our sponsor of today's edition of the Rosenberg Report, ARTSA. Go to artsabox.com. Use the discount promo code RR15, Rosenberg Report 15, to get a 15% discount off the price of your ARTSA box. They are literally a taste of the Holy Land, and they come directly to your home in a beautiful box that contains potpourri, a range of all kinds of products made in Israel by all kinds of Israeli artisans, entrepreneurs, and small business owners. You're going to love them for yourself, for your family, and they make great gifts as well. Check it out. Go to artsabox.com, use the discount code RR15, Rosenberg Report 15, and I have no doubt that you'll love these boxes, these ARTSA boxes, as much as Lynn and I do. All right, Trey, where you left us off, you're at an intersection. You've got an ambulance, you've got police cars. You're trying to figure out what to do next. Now you're hearing automatic gunfire, and you make the decision, or what you're calculating is, am I going forward? Am I taking my TV crew, Fox crew forward, or is this, something's not right? This is not, okay, rocket attacks, you've covered many of them, but automatic gunfire initial, that's not normal. What happens next?
I'll tell you the moment that I realized this is something we've never seen before. Okay. It's when the intersection turns into a triage point, and all of the people that they're bringing, wounded soldiers and civilians to this intersection, they're wounded, but they're not wounded by rocket shrapnel. They're wounded by gunfire. And that's an indication there are militants inside Israel, and the army and police are battling them, and they are shooting these soldiers and civilians. And I remember the first person that I saw die during the war. It was an officer, he had a long beard, and his friends rushed to the intersection, dragged him out of the vehicle, put him on the ground, and these paramedics came around him, they hooked him up to a defibrillator, they tried to revive him, they couldn't, they tried again, his friends were pacing back and forth, and then suddenly everything stopped. Everyone just put their hands up, and he was gone. But they didn't have time to mourn. They didn't have time to stand.
It's an ongoing attack.
It's an ongoing attack.
1,200 Israelis are going to die that day.
And almost immediately they left his body, they covered him, and on to the next casualty.
One of the interesting things in this book is that you continue to take us forward into community after community, Israeli communities on that border. You and your crew covering what it was like to be invaded by, Israeli intelligence for months, for almost all year, has said 3,000 terrorists invaded, but now Israeli intelligence is updating and saying it may have been 6,000 terrorists. So, but one of the things that's so fascinating and harrowing in your book is that you talk about Israelis that you interviewed that were taken, kidnapped, they were captives that day, dragged into Gaza, suffered in those tunnels, and then were released in that first round of hostage releases in November. Can you talk about some of those stories, help us understand what happened to these folks and what did they experience inside Gaza?
The most unique part about Black Saturday is that you learn not just about what happened in the communities in southern Israel on October 7th and in the days after, because my team and I go there and we gather the stories from Be'eri, from Nir Oz, from Kfar Aza, but you also hear from the people who were taken hostage into the tunnels beneath the Gaza Strip and then later released as part of a ceasefire deal. And there are so many of these stories that we've heard throughout the war. Black Saturday really takes you into Gaza to understand what it was like for these hostages.
You went in 5 times since this war. You had been in there before this war. I've only been inside these tunnels 1 time, but yeah, so keep going. These people that were held there, what did they tell you?
They told me some of the most horrific stories I've ever heard. Chen Olmo Goldstein, a mother from the community of Kfar Aza in southern Israel, talked about what the morning of October 7th was like for her. Her husband was executed in front of her. Her children dragged into Gaza after her daughter was killed by Hamas in their home. And you hear these stories and you try as a journalist to find moments of hope and of faith, but it's hard. And I do think it comes down to the individual, these strong people who were able to survive. This mother talks in Black Saturday as part of our interview about how she tried to reassure her kids after just watching her husband and daughter be executed that they were going to be okay. But they're later dragged into Gaza, into the tunnels beneath the Strip, and they're held there until the November ceasefire. They're moved throughout Gaza in different areas, sometimes below, sometimes above ground. But she talks about what it was like meeting some of the other people underneath Gaza, the people who are still being held there as we speak. And she's a former social worker and trying to empathize with those people, trying to remind them it's going to be okay when she knew it might not be okay.
Was she tortured? Were her children tortured? How much food did they get? What was that? What did she experience?
Her experience was horrific. She was moved from place to place, sometimes in civilian homes, sometimes in tunnels. There's a moment in the book where they're in a supermarket in Gaza, and there is a firefight erupting between the Israelis and Hamas. And she's almost killed, but these militants jump on top of her and her children. And she talks about the disconnect between the people who took her hostage trying to keep her alive because they wanted that leverage. They wanted to be able to go into negotiations with hostages who were still alive. And I think that's one of the most fascinating parts. The people who slaughtered her family and then took her hostage were trying to keep her alive inside Gaza. And she talks about that disconnect.
We only have a few moments in this segment, but what was her emotional experience coming out? First of all, did she ever think that she and her kids would get out? And then what was that night like?
I've talked with many people who were held hostage in the tunnels beneath Gaza and in civilian homes and hospitals inside the Gaza Strip. And the experience was different for everyone. For Chen, I felt that she left that experience with a mission. She wanted to make sure the people of the world knew what happened to Israel on the morning of October 7th. And she made it her mission to bring the stories of those who are still being held hostage to the world. For other people that you hear from in the book, they weren't able to find any positivity out of that. Another woman who I meet, Shani Gorin, who was taken from Nir Oz, she said it still feels like October 7th. She talks about the traumatic experience of being held in a hospital and just watching the suffering of the people around her. And you can see in her eyes, the experience was different for her. It was different for everyone. Some people found faith and religion and were able to hold on to this as the war continued and the bombardment was happening around them. They weren't sure if they were going to be killed by their captors. Other people weren't able to find anything to hold on to, and the experience was so traumatic for them, they must relive that every day.
You're a reporter. At one level, you have to keep yourself a bit of emotional, psychological distance. On the other hand, you're going through blood-soaked homes, bullets everywhere. You're seeing dead bodies. You're talking to grieving people. You're going into those terror tunnels. How are you processing it? And let me put it in context. This is Evangelical Christian Television Network, the most watched Christian TV network in the United States. Are you from a spiritual or religious background? And how are you processing this emotionally, spiritually? I'm just curious, Trey. I've never asked you this before.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in a very religious household. We went to Bible camp during the summer and celebrated Christmas and Easter.
Christian background, but
Christian background, and just I never thought of myself as a very religious person. But when you live through something like this, it makes you more spiritual because you understand that one decision could change the entire course of your life. You start to think about how much control you have over that and the larger plan of your life. And the morning of October 7th was really hard. And I talk about this in Black Saturday. I talk about the mental health aspect. I've never been someone who shies away from the personal impact these stories have on the journalists who go to gather them. But it's hard. It's hard because you think about what we saw. And I think about what we saw a lot. I think about it every day. The bodies and the people who died in front of us. I think that's always the hardest part for me. And in real time, you don't process it. But as time goes on, sometimes it comes up.
To be not a particularly religious person in the Holy Land, and then almost have it forced on, like, what do I really believe? Where am I going to go when I die? How am I going to, where's my source of hope or even peace to deal with nightmares? Or, everybody in this country is dealing with stuff, and a reporter's going to see more and experience more than a normal person just living their normal day who isn't on the front.
Yeah, it makes you think about what happens after you die, because you realize when you come that close, you don't know. And I want to know. Yeah. And so in ways like that, it makes you a more spiritual person. But, when I first moved to Israel back in 2018, whenever I was overwhelmed at work or would see difficult things in the field, I would always go for a walk in the old city of Jerusalem. And I'd put my headphones in and I'd walk to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Okay. Because for me, it's a powerful sight. It's a place that I would just walk around and clear my mind. And still today, when I go to Jerusalem, I try to go to the old city because it's powerful. It's an intersection of religion and of history. But as the war unfolded, I didn't have that luxury to be able to take long walks and clear the mind. And I think that when you go through a traumatic experience and you put yourself on the front lines, not just of this conflict, but around the world, I've been very open about the fact that I struggle with post-traumatic stress, the nightmares that come along with this.
You've covered Iraq, you've covered Afghanistan, you've been in Ukraine.
Yeah, and you see the worst of humanity on display. And it can be hard to maintain your hope and faith as a result, because you're there often for the worst day of someone's life. You have to experience these horrific scenes of bodies and blood and death and destruction like we saw on the morning of October 7th and in the days after. And then you have to go back to being a reporter on television for millions of people and do your work.
Trey, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. Please pick up a copy of Black Saturday. It's important for you to read. It's important for you to share with others, because it's not just what's happened over the past year since and the implications of what happened on October 7th. A lot of people, a lot of Americans, a lot of Christians still don't quite understand what actually happened on the 7th and what happened to the people who went through it that day and in the months that followed. So you can pick up a copy of Black Saturday at foxnewsbooks.com or, of course, wherever you like to get your books. Thank you so much for watching the Rosenberg Report. Don't miss next week's program, because I'm going to talk to Trey about the military implications of the war that set into motion and his conversations, his exclusive conversations with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who has not talked to reporters much over the past year. So don't miss that. Please share a link to this show on your social media to share with family and friends. You can get those links at rosenbergreport.tv or, of course, on our YouTube channel. May God give you a good and peaceful week, more peaceful perhaps than we're experiencing here in Israel. But may God encourage you as you walk with the Lord Jesus Christ, as you read His Word, as you walk in the power of the Holy Spirit, and as you show compassion to your own family and friends and neighbors and those less fortunate. And, of course, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Until next week, again, have a good week. And Lord willing, I'll see you next week right here on the Rosenberg Report. Thank you, Trey. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joel.